Howdy folks, hope you're all having a good one, and welcome to another episode of Mingles with Jingles. Whole bunch of things to talk about this week, although the big one's going to be the Borderlands 4 release. And why the biggest problem isn't the horrible optimization, it's the fact that Randy Pitchford is incapable of keeping his big fat stupid mouth shut. I think it's safe to say that we've all known for quite some time now that Gearbox's biggest problem is their own CEO. But before that, this. This week's episode of Mingles with Jingles, once again, I am extremely happy to be able to say, sponsored by Displate. I have been exceptionally happy with the Displate metal posters that I've received over the last month or so. In fact, the hardest part of the process was just narrowing the choice down from the frankly breathtaking range of collections and fandoms that they have available to choose from. Pretty much everything that Displate has on offer is available not only in a huge range of sizes to suit anybody's pocket, but also a huge range of different finishes, including but not limited to their brand new Textra finish. And while we're on the subject of collections, it's that time of the year again. Displate is back with their annual Collectorverse. This year, inspired by the many multiverses of pop culture, they're showcasing the multitude of options to build your collection. So no matter which fandom you belong to, Collectorverse has something for you. This month's special offer for Displate's Collectorverse runs between the 18th and the 30th of September, and you can take advantage of this discount by clicking the discount link in the description, heading to displate.com/@MightyJingles, where the discount will be automatically applied at the checkout, and use my code MightyJingles to get 32% off one or two Displates and a whopping 37% off 3 or more. Fair warning though, don't take advantage of this offer and head to Displate's website unless you're prepared to spend some money, because if you do, I guarantee you're going to see something that you want. So, before we start, I need to make it clear that I actually really like Borderlands 4. I like it a hell of a lot more than I like Borderlands 3. I don't know whether or not I'd say it's as good as Borderlands 2, time will tell, I haven't really played enough, but, early signs are encouraging. It still has that Borderlands sense of humour. I'd be disappointed if it didn't, but it's toned it down a bit. It's not in your face the whole time, the way it was in Borderlands 3. They've gone full open world this time around for Borderlands 4, and it works very, very well. Unlike a Ubisoft open world game, it doesn't feel like you're just wandering around the map doing busy work. The side quests, the open world activities, they feel like they're there for a reason rather than just to occupy your time the way they do in a Ubisoft title. As a game, I like it. I think it's very, very good. I think Gearbox have all done a very good job, and they should all be proud of their work. As a piece of software, however, not so much. And it's all to do with the optimization. Now, I've got it running in the background. This is from very, very early on in the game, so don't expect too much in the way of spoilers if you are actually watching rather than just listening to this thing as a podcast the way a lot of people do treat Mingles with Jingles. Now, I've capped my frame rate to 60 FPS because I'm not playing a competitive multiplayer shooter here or anything, and I don't need more than 60 frames per second. But it's not always running at 60 frames per second. It struggles to maintain that frame rate, and I get particular stuttering issues whenever I'm accessing menu screens or swapping between menus. Also, when out in the open world and travelling around in vehicles, which you're not going to see in the background footage today because it was recorded before I actually got access to my first vehicle. As I'm moving around between the various different areas, I will start to get a lot of lag and stuttering. Now, the two things that you need to bear in mind here, you might not actually be seeing that as you're watching this on YouTube. That's because YouTube's compression algorithm is going to be smoothing some of that out. The other thing that you need to bear in mind, I am running this on some extremely powerful hardware. Not far away from the most powerful consumer electronics it is possible to own at the moment. And I'm still getting performance issues. I can kind of imagine how bad it must be for people who are running even on the recommended system settings, which are far below my specifications. But if you're running on the minimum system specifications, well, this must be just about unplayable. That, however, is probably, it's a significant problem, but it's probably not Borderlands' biggest problem. As always, Gearbox Software's biggest problem has never been their software, it's never been their games, it's always been their CEO, Randy Pitchford. And he's at it again. He famously couldn't stop putting his foot in his mouth prior to the release of the game, and we're not going to go over all of that again because we've covered it more than enough. But now post-release, well, he's just basically being Randy Pitchford. His first and consistent response to the overwhelmingly negative criticism of the game's performance, basically over the game's weekend release, he spent the entire weekend on Twitter essentially telling people, if you don't like it, go screw yourself. I'm not exaggerating. Honestly. The best thing Gearbox could do is the month prior to and immediately after a game's release is they really need to take his phone away. One particular quote reads, Borderlands 4 is a premium game made for premium gamers. Just as Borderlands 4 cannot run on a PlayStation 4, it cannot be expected to run on too old PC hardware. This is not a game made to run on 10-year-old PCs. If you're trying to drive a monster truck with a leaf blower's motor, you're going to be disappointed. Unsurprisingly, this didn't go down too well. When your game struggles at 1080p on mainstream GPUs like the RTX 3060 and 4060, cards that dominate the Steam charts even at medium settings, frames dip under the 60s, says Fallen1254. Telling players to drop resolution to hide systemic inefficiency is damage control. And he's not wrong. And also, another issue that Randy is very suspiciously dodging, presumably because he's too busy on Twitter telling everybody that they're just making all of this up, and I'm not making that up. He actually tweeted that less than 1% of 1% of players were filing tickets about performance, so clearly the internet's overblowing it. This is a fairly typical Randy Pitchford strawman argument. He's talking about customer service tickets as a percentage of the game's overall customers, so everybody who has it installed. Rather than saying that 0.55% of customer service tickets are about, for example, people's shift accounts, which have nothing to do with optimization, he says that 0.55% of customers are having problems, and so on and so on. So he's generously interpreting these statistics. But, I mean, none of that actually matters, because maybe I'm just alone here. But if I'm having problems with the game's optimization and performance, I don't file a customer support ticket. Because what good is that going to do? I'll go onto social media and whinge about it, which is what tens of thousands of people are doing all over Twitter and YouTube, and continuing to do every day since the game's launch. Randy doesn't count these as customer support tickets. But the most important thing that I'm going to do if I have a problem with the game's performance, if it is basically unplayable, I'll just stop playing it until they fix it. And I suspect I'm probably not in the minority there. But the other rather large elephant in the room is the game's kind of misleading minimum and recommended system specifications. I'm just going to list them for you. See if you can tell me what's missing. The bare minimum to get the game running on PC, you need an i7-9700 or Ryzen 7 2700X processor, 16 gigabytes of RAM, you need a GeForce RTX 2070 or a Radeon RX 5700 XT, and 100 gigabytes of SSD. The recommended system specifications are an Intel Core i7-12700 or AMD Ryzen 7 5800X CPU, double the amount of RAM, 32 gigabytes. You're going to need a significantly more powerful GPU, either at least an RTX 3080 or a Radeon RX 6800 XT, and also 100 gigabytes of SSD. Looking at the recommended requirements, can you tell me what's missing? At no point do Gearbox say what sort of performance you can expect for the minimum and recommended system specifications. For the recommended specifications, is that going to get you 60 frames per second? And at what resolution? And with what settings? Am I going to need to upscale using DLSS to get acceptable performance? Am I going to have to turn frame generation on to get acceptable performance? And what exactly is acceptable performance? I play at 4K resolution. And for me, acceptable performance in a single-player first-person shooter is 60 frames per second. I guarantee you those recommended requirements are not going to run this game at 4K and 60 frames per second, even with DLSS upscaling and 4 times frame generation. Because I can't get that kind of performance with 64 gigabytes of RAM, a Ryzen 9800X 3D CPU, and an RTX 5090 graphics card, even with DLSS and frame generation. So, Randy, calling me, and this was the actual term that he used, 4K stubborn, when I have the best available specifications, and your game struggles to run at 1080p using mainstream hardware, I'm going to be polite and just limit myself to saying it's not particularly helpful. Oh, and by the way, the whole PC optimization and horrible performance and stuttering and frame rate issue, primarily on PC but also on console. Despite Gearbox promising PC users that fixing it is their top priority, they have yet to actually fix anything. Although YouTuber Killer6 has. He posted a review of the game along with a crucial performance tip just a couple of days ago. If you have an NVIDIA graphics card, you can manually adjust the shader cache side in the control panel. He suggested it should be set to 100 gigabytes to prevent stuttering. And it works. One of PC Gamer's writers gave the whole thing a try, and it worked. Adjusting the size of the shader cache to 100 gigabytes made it feel like he was actually playing a game rather than watching a slideshow. And just to check that changing the size of the shader cache was actually what was fixing the problem, he changed the settings back at a later point, then flushed the shader cache, and instantly the game started stuttering again. So this does fix the problem. Unfortunately, it's not a long-term solution, because his DX cache folder ballooned to 16.8 gigabytes since the game was allowed to start feasting on his SSD, and it's guaranteed to get bigger over time. So you're going to have to revert it back to the driver default as soon as you finish playing the game, or whenever Gearbox fix the issues with their horrible optimization, which of course would first probably require Randy Pitchford admitting that there was a problem with the optimization in the first place and we weren't all just making it up. So yeah, you may end up just finishing your playthrough first. And seriously though, if I have to physically increase, well, not physically, it's not like I'm going in and adding memory to the graphics card, but if I have to increase the size of my shader cache on my GPU to 100 gigabytes, maybe your game isn't optimized. So yeah, Borderlands 4, great game, horrible performance, frame rate issues, stuttering, random crashes. Do you know how long you would have to run a copy of Doom before it would crash? This isn't an idle thought experiment, by the way, somebody's actually done it. So Doom, famously created by id Software back in 1993, back in the days when games came on floppy disks, there really was no internet. So games had to be optimized to within an inch of their lives in order to not come on a dozen 1.44 megabyte floppy disks. And I think because Doom was initially released as shareware, so like the first third of the game was free and it came on a single floppy disk. I think the whole game came on another 2 floppies. You know, it was well optimized. How long would you expect a Doom executable to be able to run without crashing? Because famously, people have managed to get Doom running on just about anything. People have played Doom on a PDF file or a badge for a hacking conference. They even managed to get Doom running on the box that Doom came in. And I am making none of this up. Well, I mean, again, like I said, this is not an idle thought experiment. Somebody has actually found out. So here's the issue. Somebody booted up Doom on an old PDA, expecting it to crash at some point. This is because every time the game demo would run and then reset, the engine would store a new variable. Then it would start up again, and again it would store a new variable, all in one long string until at some point eventually it's going to crash due to an overflow, the data exceeding the possible bounds of the value used to store it. But how long it would take to crash, this was all theoretical, until it wasn't theoretical anymore. This guy called Minky ran a physical test on an old PDA. I mean, you don't need much to run Doom. Then he left the game running, which would cause the demo to loop over and over and over just to see how long it would take to crash. Any guesses? How long? Minky started running this experiment early 2023. It took 2.5 years for Doom to crash. This is software that was written in 1993. Many of you watching this video will not have been born when Doom was released, and it runs on a loop without crashing for 2.5 years. Some people are finding that Borderlands 4 can't run for 2.5 minutes without crashing. I'm going to pitch this one at you from way out in left field here, Randy, and I know, but hear me out. Maybe, possibly, your game's suffering from a couple of optimization issues. In other news about dodgy game launchers, I mentioned a couple of weeks ago the Well, I was going to say shocking news, but when you're talking about a publisher like Paradox here, the publishers of Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines 2, there is absolutely nothing shocking about Paradox taking stuff that should have been in the base game that you've all paid for, and then locking it behind day one DLC. It wouldn't be the first time, although it might be the last. Because the news that I covered, I think probably about a month ago, in the run-up to the game coming out in October, was that of the vampire clans available for you to play as a character, 2 of the 5 were locked behind day one DLC. So basically a full 2/5 of the game locked behind a paywall. I had been on the fence about Bloodlines 2, despite being a massive fan of the first game. And despite the first game being a horrible, shonky, oh screw it, let's just try to recoup our investment, said the publisher, and pushed it out before it was even remotely finished, but which was saved from obscurity by a colossal fan-made community patch that fixed most of the issues with the game and allowed you to actually play almost the game that the developer wanted it to be, and it truly was glorious. However, the sequel, Bloodlines 2, it had been in development hell for so long, it's been through so many different development teams, I had very, very little hope that any of the original vision at all was still going to be there. And this scumbag move by the publisher, locking 2 of the playable clans behind day one DLC, that sealed the deal for me. I lost all interest in it. Well, it turns out that there has been so much negative feedback. I mean, let's face it, the publisher isn't pulling a U-turn out of the goodness of their hearts. A publisher will only ever make a policy change for one of 2 reasons. Either 1, it's going to make them more money, or 2, less often, but occasionally it does happen, it's going to prevent them from hemorrhaging money. And I believe option 2 is what's happened here, because Paradox issued the following statement. Thanks to our community for the frank feedback on Bloodlines 2 and the Premium Edition, said Bloodlines 2 executive producer Marco Berman. That feedback made it clear. The La Sombra and Toreador clans belong in the base game, so that's what we're doing. Now, I don't personally care that Paradox, the publisher, didn't have the balls to make this announcement themselves and instead trotted out one of the poor game developers to make it for them. I don't care that the only reason they've made this decision is because they looked at the pre-orders getting cancelled and went into damage control mode. I'm just happy that pressure worked and that the change is being made, and I might actually give Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines 2 a look after all. It's coming out, I can't remember the exact date, sometime in October 21st, something like that. It's coming out in time for Halloween, which, you know, given the nature of the game, seems oddly appropriate, and I might in fact now be giving it a go. Before we go, there's just time to mention an indie title that you may never have heard of, and you may never have heard of it for a very, very bad reason rather than a very, very good reason. I mean, I'd never heard of it. It was called Planet Centauri. The game, a tiny indie title, looked like it was going to be doing extremely well, you know, by indie game standards. It had more than 100,000 sales, and it was earning spots on more than 130,000 Steam users' wish lists after 10 years of early access. And then the 1.0 launch happened, and they sold 581 units in 5 days. And then after 5 days, nothing. Which is pretty impressive for a game that 130,000 people had added to their Steam wishlist. You see, what's supposed to happen when you add a game to your Steam wishlist is you forget about it, because a long time can go between you adding a game to the wishlist and the game actually getting released. But don't worry, Steam's got you covered. Because when that game does get a Steam launch, Steam email you to let you know, and you go, oh yeah, that game that I'd completely forgotten about, and then you go and buy it. Steam didn't bother emailing anybody when Planet Centauri got launched, despite 130,000 people having added it to their wishlist. So in the first week, it sold 581 copies, and then it died. Steam were, of course, very apologetic, and they offered the development team a chance to spotlight the game as one of Steam's daily deals as a way to make up for lost visibility, but honestly, the damage had been done. Ah well, I guess it sucks to be them. And on that bombshell, that's it for this episode of Mingles with Jingles. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you've all had a fantastic weekend, and as always, take care, and I'll catch you next time.